Canada is quietly walking away from a fighter jet deal that had 72% of the country's population cheering for it. And the reasons behind that shift reveal something far bigger than a procurement decision. Your air defense, your sovereignty, and your military alliances are all tangled up in what just happened behind closed doors in Ottawa. Because what looked like Canada finally breaking free from American military dependence may have been something else entirely from the very beginning. Let's go back to where this story actually starts. Not March 2025, not the tariff fights, not Mark Carney's press conferences. The real starting point is a decision Canada made in 2010, then made again in 2014, then made a third time in 2023. 3 separate governments, 3 separate reviews, 3 separate conclusions, all pointing at the same aircraft. The Lockheed Martin F-35, 88 jets, 14.2 billion Canadian dollars, roughly $161 million per aircraft. First deliveries expected before the end of 2026. That deal was not rushed. It was not forced. It was the product of 15 years of deliberation, technical assessment, and defense planning by the Royal Canadian Air Force. Then Donald Trump came back, and everything that had been decided, locked in, and moving toward delivery suddenly became a political question again. Not because the aircraft changed, not because the threat environment changed, because the relationship between Washington and Ottawa changed in ways that no defense planner had modeled for. Trump's return to the White House brought tariff threats, economic confrontation, and rhetoric about Canada that went far beyond tough negotiating. The annexation language, the trade war framing, the consistent dismissal of Canadian sovereignty as a serious consideration. This was not background noise. It was a direct challenge to the foundational assumption underneath every major Canadian defense procurement decision made in the last 4 decades. That assumption being, the United States is a partner, not a pressure point. When that assumption cracked, Canada had a problem, and Prime Minister Mark Carney, elected in part on a platform of standing up to Washington, had to be seen doing something about it. In March 2025, Carney's government announced a formal review of the F-35 procurement. Not a cancellation, not a pause, a review. The language was careful. The door to the F-35 remained technically open, but the door to alternatives was also, suddenly and very publicly, swung wide open. And into that open door walked Saab. The Swedish defense company had been watching Canada's political situation with considerable interest. They had been through this before. Canada had flirted with the Gripen in previous procurement cycles and walked away each time. But 2025 was different. The political climate was different, the public mood was different, and Saab came prepared. On January 14, 2026, Saab submitted a formal proposal to the Canadian government. It was not a simple bid to sell fighter jets. It was a document constructed to answer every specific objection Canada had ever raised about replacing the F-35. 72 Gripen E aircraft, 6 Global Eye airborne early warning platforms, Bombardier designated as a key industrial partner, 12,600 Canadian jobs promised, according to Saab's own figures, full technology transfer, source code access, something Lockheed Martin has never offered any customer ever, and a sovereign data center to be built in Montreal, meaning Canadian military data would never have to pass through American servers. That proposal did not land quietly. It landed with a 72% public approval rating in an Geopolitics poll showing that nearly 3/4 of Canadians supported incorporating the Gripen into the country's fighter fleet. That number reflected something real. It reflected the anger, the frustration, and the genuine desire for distance from Washington that had been building in Canadian public opinion for months. The Gripen suddenly wasn't just a fighter jet. It was a symbol. Commentators and historians began drawing comparisons to the Avro Arrow, Canada's domestically designed supersonic interceptor that was cancelled in 1959 under pressure from Washington and the American defense industry. The Arrow had haunted Canadian aerospace identity for 65 years. The Gripen, built in Sweden, operated independently of American supply chains, and coming with full technology transfer, was being framed as its spiritual successor. Canada, the narrative went, was finally choosing its own path. This is the moment this story needs you to stay with, because right now this situation is developing faster than most of the mainstream coverage is able to keep pace with. If you want to stay ahead of where this is going, not just what happened last week, but what the decisions being made right now mean for Canadian defense, American alliances, and the future of NORAD, subscribe to this channel. This story is not finished, and the next chapter may be the most consequential one yet. Now here's where the story becomes more complicated than the headline version suggests. While the Gripen review was generating public enthusiasm and political momentum, something quieter was happening on the other side of the ledger. Canada kept paying for F-35 components. Not reluctantly, not accidentally, not as a contractual obligation they were trying to exit. Mark Carney himself confirmed in February 2026 that Canada had paid deposits on long lead manufacturing components, including a deposit on 14 additional aircraft, during the very period the public review of the F-35 was supposedly underway. Let that sit for a moment. The government that launched a formal review of the F-35 deal was simultaneously writing checks for more F-35 parts. The review that was generating newspaper headlines about Gripens and sovereignty and Swedish independence was coexisting in practice with continued financial commitment to the program under review. This is not necessarily hypocrisy. There is a reasonable operational explanation. Long lead components for complex military aircraft have production timelines that stretch years ahead of delivery. Stopping payment would not pause production. It would trigger contract penalties and potentially push Canada further back in the delivery queue. Defense Minister David McGuinty confirmed that the first 16 F-35s remain on schedule for delivery by late 2026, and that the review covers only the remaining 72 aircraft. But the picture this creates is worth examining carefully. Canada was conducting a public review of whether to continue with 72 jets while quietly ensuring the first 16 were still coming. The review was real. The political signal was real. Whether it was ever intended to actually produce a Gripen purchase is a different question, and one that Ottawa has not answered clearly. The Royal Canadian Air Force was never enthusiastic about the Gripen option, and their reasons were technical rather than political. Senior officers, including Lieutenant General Spencer Blanche, testified that operating a mixed fleet of F-35s and Gripens would create significant operational problems. Double the training pipelines, double the maintenance infrastructure, double the spare parts inventory, double the technical certification requirements. Blanche used the words more costly and complicated, and those words, in the context of a defense budget already under strain, carried real weight with the procurement planners who actually run these programs. There was also the question of NORAD. The North American Aerospace Defense Command is the joint U.S. Canada framework for continental air defense. Its data architecture, its communication systems, its identification protocols, all of it is built around aircraft that the United States has approved for integration. The F-35 integrates natively into that architecture. The Gripen does not, and there is currently no American guarantee that it ever would. U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra made this explicit in terms that Canada's defense community found impossible to ignore. If Canada moved away from the F-35, Hoekstra indicated, the United States might be forced to restructure NORAD, potentially bringing more American jets into Canadian airspace to compensate for the interoperability gap. Whether you characterize that statement as a warning or as a pressure tactic depends on your political perspective. What it unambiguously represented was Washington signaling that a Gripen purchase would have consequences for the most fundamental security arrangement Canada has. And then there is the money beyond the fighters. Canada's defense relationship with the United States extends well beyond which jet sits on the tarmac. More than $100 billion in broader defense contracts are currently in the ecosystem. HIMARS rocket systems, P-8A maritime patrol aircraft, MQ-9B surveillance drones, destroyer combat systems. These programs have their own interoperability requirements, their own data architectures, their own supplier networks. A decision to decouple from American platforms in the fighter jet space does not stay contained to the fighter jet space. Here's the question I want to put to you directly. Do you think Canada's Gripen review was a genuine attempt to find an alternative to American military dependence? Or was it always a negotiating signal designed to extract better terms from Washington and Lockheed Martin? Because the evidence points in both directions, and your answer probably says something about how you interpret the Carney government's broader strategy. Let me know what you think in the comments. This is a debate worth having. Then came April 2026, and an entirely new variable entered the equation. The Global Combat Air Program, known as GCAP, is a next-generation, sixth-generation fighter being developed jointly by the United Kingdom, Japan, and Italy, with a target operational date of 2035. In April 2026, it was confirmed that the GCAP consortium was coordinating a potential invitation for Canada to join the program. This is not a procurement offer. Canada has not been invited to buy a GCAP jet, but it is a signal from three major democratic allies, none of them the United States, that Canada has options beyond choosing between the American F-35 and the Swedish Gripen. The GCAP opening matters for a reason that goes beyond the aircraft itself. It represents the possibility of Canadian involvement in a program at the design and development stage, which is fundamentally different from being a customer buying someone else's finished product. The industrial implications, the technology access implications, and the sovereignty implications of participation at that level would be categorically different from anything the Gripen deal was offering. This is still speculative. Canada has not formally expressed interest. The timeline stretches a decade forward, but it has changed the geometry of the conversation in ways that are not yet fully visible in the public reporting. As of May 2026, here is what is confirmed. Defense Minister David McGuinty has stated that the review of the remaining 72 aircraft is still incomplete. No decision has been announced. The first 16 jets remain on track for late 2026 delivery. Canada is still formally inside the F-35 program while simultaneously maintaining that a review of the remaining purchase is ongoing. The Saab proposal, with its 12,600 jobs promise, deserves one important caveat. The figure comes from Saab's own submission, and it has been directly challenged. Industry Minister Melanie Joly cited a figure of 10,000 jobs in public statements. Analysts from the Macdonald-Laurier Institute pointed out that Saab's entire global aerospace division employs approximately 8,000 people. That context does not make the Canadian jobs promise impossible, but it does make it a claim that should be treated with appropriate scrutiny, rather than accepted as established fact. What the Gripen episode accomplished, regardless of whether it ever results in a purchase, may be more political than military. It demonstrated that Canadian public opinion had reached a point where 72% of respondents would support a significant break from American defense dependency. It gave the Carney government a visible symbol of sovereign intent at a moment when domestic politics demanded exactly that. It forced a public conversation about what Canadian defense independence actually means in practical operational terms. And it may have communicated something to Lockheed Martin and to Washington about the cost of taking Canadian partnership for granted. Whether the review was strategic leverage, genuine deliberation, or a combination of both, the honest answer is that we do not know. No insider confirmation of a deliberate bluff has been provided. No concessions from Washington have been publicly reported. The claim that Canada extracted secret advantages from this process is analysis and interpretation, not established fact. What is established is this: Canada chose the F-35 3 times before this review. Canada is still paying for F-35 components during this review. The first F-35s are still being delivered at the end of this year, and the review of the remaining 72 jets is still officially open. The story the Gripen generated was real. The symbol it represented was real. The public desire for a different kind of relationship with Washington that it reflected was real. Whether the Gripen itself was ever the destination or whether it was always the tool used to negotiate something else entirely, that remains the most important unanswered question in Canadian defense policy right now. Most people watching this story are getting the headlines. They are getting the polls, the job promises, the sovereignty rhetoric, and the Avro-Arrow comparisons. Subscribers to this channel get the full picture: what the procurement documents actually show, what the NORAD warnings actually mean, and what the GCAP invitation could actually change. If you are not subscribed yet, now is the time. The decisions being made in Ottawa and Washington over the next 12 months will shape Canadian defense for the next 30 years. The main tension of this story resolves here. Canada did not abandon the F-35. Canada used the possibility of abandoning it. Whether that use produced results, we do not yet know. The first jets are coming. The review of the rest is still open. And the Gripen, for now, remains exactly what it may always have been: a powerful card played at a specific moment for reasons that had as much to do with politics as with aviation. But there is a question this story leaves open that is bigger than fighter jets. If Canada does join GCAP, it would be entering a defense development program with the United Kingdom, Japan, and Italy, and not the United States. For the first time in modern Canadian defense history, the primary next-generation military platform could be built entirely outside the American industrial ecosystem. What that means for NORAD, for the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, and for the fundamental architecture of North American security is a question nobody in Ottawa is publicly answering yet. In my next video, I'm covering exactly that: Canada's potential GCAP involvement, and what I found about the quiet conversations already happening between Ottawa, London, and Tokyo will change how you see the future of the U.S.-Canada alliance entirely.